The United States has a long history of regulating air emission sources. The last half of the 20th century saw many federal regulatory programs develop with the intention of reducing air emissions. Prior to this, air pollution laws were primarily local initiatives. After World War II, many new industries developed and required the use of more new chemicals, many of them synthetic. The health and environmental impact from these emerging and exotic chemicals, such as polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, and pesticides such as DDT, would manifest their harmful effects in the coming decades. The post-World War II era saw a boom in many of the primary industries such as smelting, mining, consumer goods manufacturing, energy production, and chemical manufacturing. All of these processes required the use of fossil fuels. This energy demand and the manufacturing processes supporting a growing population contributed to air pollution levels never seen before. There were several federal U.S. governmental efforts to address air pollution, such as the 1955 Clean Air Act legislation, the 1963 Clean Air Act, and its 1965 amendment, the Motor Vehicle Air Pollution Control Act. These laws left the primary administration and enforcement responsibility to the states. Meaningful rules were finally created and approved with the 1970 Clean Air Act. This act established the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. Essentially, the EPA had to identify and set standards for those pollutants determined to be most dangerous to human health and the environment. Although the states would be the primary administrators of the 1970 Clean Air Act, there was now a more universal approach to issuing permits, and states had to meet the federal pollution levels. States could create their own rules, but they had to be as or more stringent than the federal rules. This act also allowed citizens to sue violators of the law. Perhaps one of the most aggressive and meaningful parts of the act was a requirement to phase out lead in gasoline. This would turn out to be one of the most successful environmental initiatives of its time. In 1977, the Clean Air Act was amended in part because many states failed to meet the 1970 targets. Included in these amendments was a new source review, NSR, provision. There was an assumption that older, more polluting facilities would phase out, and they were originally exempt from most of the 1970 Clean Air Act requirements. What happened is that rather than building new, cleaner operating facilities, many of these older facilities were in fact expanded. The NSR limited the amount of changes and expansions that an old facility could undergo without having an EPA review and approval. In what seems to be one of the truly last bipartisan important pieces of environmental legislation, the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments was passed by a democratically controlled Congress and signed into law by Republican President George H. Bush. The 1990 Clean Air Act amendments addressed a far range of issues including acid rain, stratospheric ozone protection, and the establishment of many national emission standards for hazardous air pollutants to curb the release of almost 200 of the most toxic substances. Although global climate change threatens national security, human health, and the environment, the U.S. Congress has so far failed to pass any meaningful legislation to address this issue. Most other industrial countries, and even several U.S. states, have passed laws setting limits and rollbacks to carbon emissions. There has been executive and agency actions to limit global climate change, such as increased fuel efficiency for motor vehicles, such as the average fleet miles per gallon must be about 49 by 2025.